Sorry that the last video ended a little bit abruptly. I wasn't paying attention at the time. Actually, I want to go back to a previous slide that I missed because the one that I was talking about at the end of the last video was more some of the kind of liberal reactions to conservatism in Britain. Let's go back to why England at first was turning more towards conservatism. So it's important to be familiar with the two different political parties. The Conservatives are represented by the Tory party. They were the ones who defeated Napoleon during the revolution, during the end of the Napoleonic Wars. And the Tories are very obviously kind of reactionary against the governmental changes in the French Revolution. They certainly want to see more of a balance of power in kind of the map of Europe after the French Revolution. So since the Tories control the government, we're going to see them contribute to a turn more towards conservatism in the government, and the general population is going to react against this. But they don't revolt like some of the other European countries do. So that's one of the really important things to realize, that there is no revolution in Britain in the mid-19th century. So one major conservative measure was the Corn Laws. They're passed in 1815, and what they're doing is they are preventing uh, Britain from importing grains from outside of England, right? And this is important because in many circumstances, grains were cheaper in countries outside of England, right? So ultimately, many citizens were upset with this because they saw it as a restriction to the laissez-faire economy that was advocated by many liberals, right? This was seen as something in their minds that really only benefited the wealthiest classes because they were the people that owned property. They were the people that had, access to grains much more easily than people who were not in the farming industry. So if you were in the middle or working class, you weren't most likely involved in agriculture anymore, so you had to buy your grains from someone else. And since they were more expensive, since they only could come from Britain, according to the Corn Laws, this was something that upset the majority of the population. All right, so ultimately, this is going to lead to an event called the Peterloo Massacre, which takes place in 1819. And what this is a series of anti-corn law it's a anti-corn law protest that takes place, right? So a bunch of protesters gather to protest against the corn laws, and the British government sends a police force to stop them, right? And this results in a lot of violence. There are 11 victims, 11 people that are killed by the police during the Peterloo Massacre, but then there are 400 people that are wounded, and 100 of them are women. So this really, really upsets the people that women are actually being attacked by the police. Um, this is also going to result in a more kind of a government tightening over the press. It's going to prevent mass meetings and organizations for fear that there are going to be more liberal revolts against the government. And you're going to see that by 1820 or so, England is going to be turning more conservative to try to stop any kind of liberal revolts. All right, so that's England. Um, so going back to the liberal English reforms here that I was talking about in the uh, previous video here, talked about the reform bill already. So realize again that this appeases a lot of people because it extends the vote to a lot of districts that are increasing in population due to the increase in manufacturing. Also started to talk about the Chartists in the last video, but that's when I ran out of time. The Chartists are more important in the long term because at first they are not able to gain enough influence to inspire the government to enact universal suffrage. But of course, in the 19th century, towards the end, you're going to see a movement more towards expanding the electorate. All right, because of the reform bill, only about 12% of the population is voting, right? So we know that the electorate is not at all universal. But by 1928 in England, you're going to see that the entire population, including women, can vote. So the Chartists do kind of inspire future movements towards expanding suffrage. The Corn Laws are going to be repealed in 1846. So this shows us again kind of a turn more towards liberalism. All right, so how does this work? Well, it is a result of an organization against the Corn Laws. It's called the Anti-Corn Law League. This is made up of middle and working class people because they feel like food prices should be lowered, right? And it should also allow people to uh, buy grain at the best price possible, and this means that they should be able to go outside of England to buy grain. Um, so promoting more of a laissez-faire economic system. This is also a reaction to a certain extent of the Irish potato famine, right? Because it is less easy for British people to be able to buy food at a reasonable price because Ireland, as part of Great Britain, is experiencing a serious food shortage. So, there's a greater need to go outside of England to buy food products. And so this is very liberal in the sense that we're going to see more of a movement towards free trade in Great Britain. Also, there's going to be labor reform acts that uh, inspire more liberalism in England, right? Some of these we already talked about in chapter 22. So just as a recap, the Factory Act puts restrictions on child labor, right? A number of hours. So if you are 14 to 18, you have a 14-hour day as opposed to a 16-hour day or maybe even greater. If you are 9 to 13, you have a limit at a 10-hour day, and if you're under 9, you have to go to school, and industries have to provide to create these schools. So this is certainly kind of a movement in a more liberal direction against child labor. Also, you're going to have the Poor Law of 1834, that is. And what this is going to do is provide workhouses for the healthy unemployed workers. So this is going to prevent vagrancy and crime. The Mines Act, we already talked about in chapter 22, but again, as a recap, it's going to prohibit child labor in the mines, and it's also going to prevent women from working in the mines. This women don't like, but it's good for repressing child labor. Also, you're going to have the 10-Hour Act. So this is going to make it so that women and children, the 10-Hour Act is kind of going further in the liberal direction from the Factory Act because now women and children are limited to a 10-hour workday. Um, so in general, you're going to see that kind of unrest against the government and kind of changes during the Industrial Revolution are actually smaller in England compared to other countries in the 19th century. And a lot of this is because the English government is able to respond, by repealing the Corn Laws, for example, and by enacting more liberal labor reforms. This shows us that because of the government's action, there is not a need to have a more liberal revolution against the government in England. So in France, however, we see a different story. All right, so France, first there are revolutions in 1830, and then we're going to see how these kind of inspire some of the later revolutions in 1848. So, because France sees the current government in 1830 as too conservative, the revolutions of 1830 are a reaction against what they see as a repressive and conservative government. And this is largely because of who the king of France is at this time, Charles X. Charles X was trying to kind of go back to the old order. He wanted to reverse away from the constitutional monarchy that was established by the French Revolution and kind of reinvoke divine right rule. He wanted to censor the press. He wanted to kind of get rid of a constitutional government, and he wanted to restrict voting rights. So all these things are going to inspire the July Revolution against King Charles X. And so what happens is this July Revolution in 1830 is going to lead to King Charles's abdication, and he will be replaced by Louis Philippe, who is known as the bourgeoisie king because he is supported by the upper middle class in particular, right? Bourgeoisie bankers and businessmen are very much in favor of Louis Philippe taking the throne. So in a way, we're going to see that this is not, again, this is not like a radical revolution because the upper middle class has the most influence in the government. So this is kind of narrow liberalism as opposed to like more widespread liberalism or even a socialist rebellion. We're going to see more of a socialist rebellion in 1848 in France. So this means that the vote really does not expand very much, right? France is still largely controlled by a liberal, a wealthy elite. So again, 1830 revolutions are not very dramatic. However, they are important because the reaction against the government in general, right, a reaction against King Charles X, is going to inspire revolutions in other parts of Europe, particularly in about 18 years in 1848. The general saying about revolutions really from the French Revolution on into the 19th century is that when France catches a cold, or sorry, when France sneezes, the rest of Europe catches a cold. So France is a very inspirational country to kind of lead to revolutions in different parts of Europe. Particularly intellectually. Remember how the Enlightenment spreads throughout Europe eventually, right? You're going to see that students who tend to be more liberal or even radical are going to kind of look towards intellectual thought in France to think about how they might want to make changes in their own governments. So we're ending a little bit early. Don't need to have a full 15-minute video for the second one. So this is part two of chapter 23. We'll talk about the actual revolutions of 1848 next time.